Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we got ourselves a track from an act named Embers of the Crown titled Fractured, and if we switch over to here we have ourselves the EP on the screen on Spotify with 5 tracks in it. Apparently they are a cinematic melodic metal band, so that's dope, and we're going to listen through it from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Actually quite like the art there with the fracture, I think it's quite cool, but we've got track number 1, Judgement. Let's go, let's do it. What do we got? Interesting sound design with those guitars and drums. Very dynamic range. No, this is good. I like the variety of different guitar riffs and chord progressions. Interesting lines, interesting bars. You know, well done. I mean, it's a really well-designed guitar solo. I mean, sorry to interrupt the vocals there. The drums are good. I like the freneticism, the speed of them. And how we go half harmonies parts and are a lot more simplified with the kick and snare patterns. That's like main guitar riff at the start. Go use the vocal melodies just as an ambient layer. So that was Judgement, the first track off the Fractured EP by Embers of the Crown. And each of these little post-track sections, I'm going to be providing a sort of mini-song analysis per song, and then at the end there's going to be an overall conclusion which goes through sort of an overall analysis, applicable constructive critique, and then general thoughts. So for now though, what do we think Judgement is about? I think Judgement there's a lot going on there lyrically. There's a lot to take, and you probably need multiple listens to really sort of absorb everything, because there's so many interesting things to sort of like absorb and sort of process in real time. But if I was to sort of have a guess at what Judgement was about, it's discussing maybe how other people are judging the person, telling the story, how they delete things to suit their worldview, what that makes them feel, what that puts them through, all the different angles on that judgment, culminating to that final understanding and assessment of it. So I feel that it's an interesting sort of intellectually sophisticated thing to discuss. It's done in a way where it's quite eloquent, even if there's a lot to absorb. The vocal stylings, you got the lady vocalist there, and there's some really wonderful clean melodies, a very comfortable and a hidden chest voice, a mixed voice as well, but a vocal fry occasionally for a bit of kind of edge and grit, considering the middle stylings of the various sort of like synth, key, guitar, bass, and drum patterns we've got. This is not your typical Taylor Swift day in the park. And there's a lot of different guitar riffs and melodies and lead and rhythm parts, as well as the drums. There's a lot to appreciate, but just to focus on the vocals for the second. I like how we express and emphasize ourselves differently in each section, whether it's verses or choruses or little breaks or interludes. I like how we allow there to just be an extended guitar solo section there with varying ways, more melodic soloing and more sort of shreddy stuff and variations of rhythm and cadence of those. I like that we made little adjustments of the rhythm of the way we sort of tell the vocals there, and how we know to sort of put emphasis on certain lines to sort of have them cut and not have them completely rhythmically symmetrical to what's going on in the surrounding elements. So we have some notes kind of linger a bit more than others. There's vibrato and legato technique there. I could be misremembering, there are some harmonies there, but it's mostly sort of male sort of like solo elements in the start, like a tale from the person telling the story. And so effectively that's very good. Outside of the really kind of wonderful vocal performance, we have ourselves a track at 5 minutes 26, which is just carefully decorated with a variety of different sort of riff, sort of drum and bass and vocal ideas there. The transitions between elements are seamless. It never feels like it's too much, although what I will say is by the 3-minute mark, I did kind of feel like we definitely had a song by that point. And that's not me saying I was sick of it. It's just we'd had enough at that point to kind of feel like comfortable assessing that we'd had an experience with Judgement. We have the beginning of the track, which is really kind of cool in how the vocals slowly come in over time. And I like that there's a kind of a mystique to it, a mystery with the reverb tails and how they kind of harken in far more than what you might be suspecting. You have these guitar takes that come in around the sides and introduce themselves with these alternate picking parts that with the distortion and they're quite sort of fizzy. And the drums come in, and the drums are just a consistent measure of tone of velocity there. They're the epitome of we can go slow or we can go fast, and it's great to have moments where there aren't drums, but that's a compliment, by the way. I like that we handle a lot of the kind of finicky 16th and 32nd note patterns on the kit, messing around with the snares, kicks, double kicks, and the toms, but I like how in the chorus sections we also know to slow down a little bit and take our time with it and not overstay our welcome. I like we adjust with varied sort of like quarters, eighths, and 16ths per section as well. There are specific drum beats per part there. We're also aware of some of the cadences relatives as the guitar and vocal parts, and we sort of try to allow for those. But the guitar elements there we're doing are sort of more sort of predictable power chord measures within the choruses, for example, for a catchier kind of feel to it. That's just a fundamental of the kind of metalcore genre, I suppose, as well as other metal genres such as, you know, melodic metal, because there's a lot of melody within it. And I like the thud of the kicks and how they kind of sidechain a little bit as the guitars go around. I think that's really cool. I just think the rhythm guitars have a lot of energy to them, and they surround the stereo field really neatly. But then that solo section, we have this fluidity to the shred there as we ascend in our fretboard, and it's just really wonderful to kind of hear the various sort of phrasings there in that rich use of sort of like use a mix of sort of like palm muted alternate picked elements there, repetitions and of certain ideas to make it more sort of I suppose more catchy, I suppose at the same time, to have less variety in terms of the notes thereafter, the kind of wildness of, because to make it more similar to like the flow of like the vocals, for example. They're like the guitar is trying to respect what the vocals are trying to do as having its own time in the sun, and there's plenty of room and real estate within a piece like this to do that. Our use of sort of bends and vibratos and pitch harmonics going into those sort of like frequencies as well, it's really cool. And the bass as well and the undertones is just nice and formidable and supportive of the drum and guitar elements there. And I think we do have, again, we have keys at some parts there, just sort of working with those triads. They're not trying to do anything too sort of spicy or outside the diatonics. And ultimately, instrumentally, things flow through and are very effective. There's a very tight performance instrumentally, structurally sound. Thematically, minor leaning, clearly, given the subject matter, Judgement clearly isn't a happy thing. We don't try to sort of like extend it for complication or nuance there. We have very sort of bass lines and chord progressions, but ultimately, yeah, we're focusing on the difficulties that we're going through and the reality of the situation not being particularly ideal, not to sort of to minimize it. Ultimately, though, I think the chord choices, the note choices, the instrumental parts, and the vocals do combine really neatly. It's an effective performance, not a note out of place. And the studio recording, mixing and mastering is done quite well as well. The vocals, guitars, bass, drums, etc. have nice presence through the mix. There is dynamic range from production and composition, such as the automation of the volume going up at the start of the track and kind of things fading out near the end, being a bit more quieter with low key with the guitars and pianos and stuff. And vocal melodies, and effectively, yeah, we just handle our fundamentals well from a productions perspective. So it's just a great start to the EP. We got Condemned, track number 2. Great exploration of that. Yeah, great exploration of the range. It's just so filthy, isn't it? Very used to the Phrygian.
The days don't change, they just repeat. Same weight on my chest, same air to breathe. Nothing lives, nothing clears. Just the
Great synth bass sequence underneath as well.
losing shape in here. I don't hear voices, I hear routines. I don't feel watched, I feel unseen. Every mirror tells me less, every answer turns into guess. I didn't break all at once, I just was in until the outline you left started sinking in. I wake up smaller than I was, speaking lines I never chose. Every step I take stays fast, every thought already bent. I don't remember where it began, I just know how it ends. I'm still here, still breathing, but I'm condemned.
Yeah, great transition there, nice little tail there.
Time doesn't heal, it reinforces. Turn survival into courses. I don't
Turn survival into chorus. Some of these lines are very good.
I adapt. I fold myself to fit the
solo here. Good choice.
A slow conversion into expectation. I don't feel anger, I don't feel shame.
Good transition to the fills. To the toms, should I say.
I wake up smaller than I was. I speak in lines I never chose. Every step I take stays fenced. Every thought already bent. I don't remember where it began. I just know how it ends. I'm still here, still breathing, but I'm condemned.
I just like those pauses of the vocals by themselves. I think it's very sensible songwriting. Unsure if the leads are a bit too enmeshed into the mix or not. Not sure if I like the 808 at the end, the dome. It just sounded like out of tune with it, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that was a deliberate thing there or not, but maybe it's meant to go in the fault line, or maybe it's meant to sort of be a question mark after it. Either way, I think Condemned is a track about what this person's gone through in terms of the judgment, because I'm going to assume that the EP is chronological or consecutive in that specific, sort of like, in that matter. What I think is really important about this is that but I think they're trying to sort of, again, as per Judgement, more sort of discuss the situation for what it is. They talk about being survival being a course, so they're discussing how they've gone through some trials and tribulations and been sort of like assumed upon by others, you know, and gone through difficulties, and they're just talking about how this is their reality at this point. They have been condemned, but they're still standing there, so they're still trying to move forward. But it's just what it is. That is their reality now. And I think it's just, it makes me wonder what's going to happen with like Faultline, for example, or Severance and Absolution. Now, I assume Absolution is going to potentially, you know, we all know what Absolution means. Being set free from guilty of sin or punishment or anything like that. So it's definitely a journey we're going on with Embers of the Crown. Similar comments to the first track in terms of the quality of the vocal performance. I like, again, the continued diversity and variety there with on the mic. We show good range in our vocal technique with our clean sort of sung vocals as well as our fried parts. And I like that we kind of play around with legato a little bit in some of those tails, and that we're by ourselves before we come in with the rest of the other instruments. Again, there's just a sense of intimacy about that. So yeah, another solid instrumental performance where I can understand the expression and how that relates to the lyrics and the melodies that we're singing, so things are well connected and now is sort of mindful of the surrounding elements as well. It's a longer track at 4 minutes 52, which is outside the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot, same as Judgement, but we don't have any filler in here. Like, it's a shorter track, but we end up with 2 guitar solos. We have some interesting kind of ambient rhythm sort of guitars, arpeggiating elements at the start there, as well as some vocal hummed kind of melodies, and I just think it's a nice sort of pretty way to begin proceedings. We're not getting into the heavy stuff immediately. And there is just a sense of tension with some of the note choices that we use there. They aren't super clean. And we play around with some interesting note choices through the different rhythm guitarists and stuff like that as well. There, I like the use of natural harmonics in some points as well for a bit of a chummy feel alongside distortion, bit of break and Benjamin in there. But like, it's a song where we're going kind of A-B side between the harder hitting distorted power chord elements there, in amongst the guitar solos as well, which is separate to that, and then sort of ambient guitar reverb, sort of delay tail, etc. So I think ultimately it's just a really tried true effective way of doing that kind of production with guitar work. You know, it's great for compositional dynamic range. And yeah, no, we've got a inherent catchiness with the cadence and flow of the vocals over top of the chorus parts with the power chords and the guitar, the bass being sort of supportive of that, as well as the drums doing sort of main sort of normal time beats, as well as fill transfers, you know. with occasional pauses before the vocals end for the hook, and then we go back into that riff, and it's nice and bouncy. And to be fair, we don't just have ABA be the entire time with the clean guitars. I think we do come with some palm muted rhythm but guitar parts around the middle there for a bit of structural or compositional diversity there. So there's a bit of extra edge to the overall intensity of it. And we have that sort of trade-off to the solo section, like that's very sort of typical of music within this genre, and it was a nice sort of, again, melodic, sort of colorful guitar solo with wide vibratos. It's more sort of like hard rocky with some unison bends in this one, rolling with the minors and the pentatonics as well. It kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the work that Zakk Wylde does, with that second solo at the end being more sort of reminiscent of your typical outro solo that's less complicated technically and more sort of suited to replicating some of the vocal melodies it is we had beforehand. It's more of a sort of a kind of a signal that things are about to end as opposed to a big shred or fine off. But yeah, no, it's just great to have different guitar solos, different verse and chorus sections, transfers being seamless, and continued consistency in terms of the actual performance of the kit. The drums are a bit less wild within this one. I don't think we necessarily needed to have the same energy as Judgement, so I like that we can adjust to the kind of intensity of the rhythm section. And it's also cool in some of those bridge sections or interlude parts there that we're going more towards a tom focus there, where dum. We have almost like a middle eight-ish kind of thing where we have the no drums and then suddenly, oh, the floor toms and highs, etc. Gives it more of sort of an organic kind of earthy feel before we go back into the full kit. So yeah, honestly, enough variety within the drums as well to sort of elevate, and again, similar connection between guitar, bass, drums, and parts, as well as the vocals to what I mentioned in Judgement. Thematically, minor oriented, which makes total sense to me as well. This is not a happy situation either, so we're not too literal about it. Works well within the genre. And the guitars, tones, the chord choices, having the midsection be a bit brighter with those guitar solos as well as the vocalist in a higher range kind of brightens up the track a little, which is kind of nice and makes it not seem too sort of like depressing or dire, which is cool despite the struggle they're going through. They find a balance. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, similar comments to the previous part there. It's nice to have those effects chains on those ambient rhythms, sort of like arpeggiated or sort of like picked guitar parts in those quieter sections. It makes it sort of seem kind of lush and dreamlike. It's nice to also have a sense of heft to those kind of chunky power chord or drum parts in the heavier sections. I like that those are captured without being choked. Typically guitar, bass, drums leveled similarly. So basically a lot of the post-production comments I'm going to make per track and these little mini conclusions are probably going to be the same. I'm just going to sort of point out potential highlights, but vocals are present, dynamic range compositionally, nice and loud with that pumping. It's just that little note at the end of it, which I don't necessarily know if that was in tune or not on the 808, but aside from that, it's still very good. Very happy with it. Because we got Faultline, track number 3 for today. Oh, it's quick. Good. Oh. That was a spicy pitch.
Held every crack in place. Counted steps, controlled the bend. Made pressure feel like strength. But something shifting under skin. A tremor I can't cage. I feel the pattern starting to slip, but I still wear the shape. I don't break loud, I don't fall apart. I feel it low before it starts. I'm still standing. But the ground beneath won't hold. Every line I drew for balance is losing control. I feel the falling.
Yeah, okay. Sorry to interrupt. It might have been a bit loud in the mic. I was not sure about the start of it until we got to the end of the chorus, the end of that sort of loop, and that's a spicy decision to make in terms of composition, to kind of trust the listener with that. It does take your attention a little bit, but I suppose maybe that's the intent. They wanted you to then go listen through it a bit more and go, oh, that's the context for it. Okay.
Nothing's breaking all at once, but nothing's complete.
Parallel majors. Cool. That's a fun idea.
I kept my voice inside the frame, measured every word, turned reaction into math, till silence felt assured. Now every answer comes up short, every rule bends wrong. I don't know where the limit is, I just know it's gone. I don't shake it, I don't show the strain, but I feel the stress
cool.
I'm still standing, but the ground beneath won't hold.
Good job on that growl.
Every line I drew for balance is losing control. I feel the fall line tearing under my feet. Nothing's breaking all at once, but nothing's complete.
I don't. Don't know about the tone on that guitar solo, like the note twists were cool, but it sounded a bit kind of synthetic.
Chaos, this is delay. Everything balanced, one move away. I don't need impact to feel it give. I don't need collapse to know how I live. I'm still standing, but the ground beneath won't hold. Every line I drew for balance is losing control. I feel the fall line tearing under my feet. Nothing's breaking all at once, but nothing's complete.
No, I feel like it's a really strong single. No, that's a really strong single. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot going on that I like. We ended the track well. I just think I'm not sure about the tone of that solo guitar. It just sounded a bit kind of unusual. But that was Faultline, track number 3. So I liked a lot of it. I thought that the track was about someone after being condemned, going through the difficulties, the trials, you know, the issues that they have, whilst also just trying to sort of keep themselves standing, but then just things are happening underneath them. They're trying to create boundaries and make space for themselves and try and find a better way of coping with things, but it's just shaking them up and they're just struggling to sort of maintain a foothold underneath the shifting sands. And so I think that there was an interesting sort of exotic parallel major feel to some of the vocal melodies that I really did dig here. Again, we're comfortable on a hidden chest voice. I liked that really visceral growl or fry that we had at one point near the middle. I thought that just sounded really dope. But it was also cool to kind of experiment with coloration and alternate sort of chromatics outside the diatonic, the minor scale. In that part there, I liked that we're a bit more sort of playful there, and we did something different harmonically. And then we managed to sort of like have that chorus make sense on the second go around, and by the time the second hook came around, you were used to it. So you're like, yeah, no, I appreciate this now, this is cool. I like the use of double tracking as well in certain parts to sort of make give the vocals a bit more sort of size and prominence within the mix. It was very good. And that little breath at the start before we came into it was them getting ready to tell their story. And it's a very quick track as well. I mean, like, outside of the vocals and the way they sort of like tell the story, with a bit of frustration, because I suppose, you know, like, clearly there's more than a bit of frustration with the growl and everything like that, but just 3 minutes 33 for this, I think, is the right length. I think they managed to get the subject matter out in the way they needed to, especially with the speed of the track being a bit quicker there. You're just going to get a shorter track by proxy. But just some of the double kicking guitar patterns, especially in that solo section, were just like brutal, dude. I thought it was dope. There was some cool pinch harmonics. There were some interesting individual instrument ideas that were put forward. I kind of thought they were going to go double time for a lot of this with the way that the snares built at the start. And it's totally fine that they did, and they ended up going for almost kind of a Limp Bizkit-ish kind of approach to the breakdowns and stuff. And it was nice and heavy and sort of filthy sounding when around that 15-second mark when all the guitars, bass, drums came in after the intro. We really are doing sort of like fake outs and playing with listener expectations and sort of maintaining interest despite that. Going down with some synthetic sort of sequencer textures there, which was kind of nice in that verse part there. It's shifting things up again. We have several different sort of musical ideas that are communicated in such a short space of time that I have to sort of admire the kind of courage to be able to do that. I think we're into the chorus around 40 seconds as well. It's just crazy. This track moves so quickly. We don't really sit in an idea for too long, and I don't think that's a detriment. This would again be the single if we were going to release one. Or maybe I'm tripping and the 44-second mark was the 105. I'm not sure, but either way, it was cool. There's enough going on there. And with the similar kind of power chord ideas, there were some occasional pinch harmonics and So natural harmonics and chug chugs. The drums playing a mixture of different quarters, eighths and sixteenths, and 30 seconds with the kicks and the crescendoing snares at the start, for example, as well as in the end of that solo section. Lead guitars exploring a far sort of simpler melody in this one, but with that kind of frenetic shredding ascension going on at the end there, which is rhythmically really satisfying with the kicks. And it was nice to get to work outside the parallel majors with the Phrygian there. I think we were maybe going with a harmonic minor with this one, which added an interesting sort of taste to it. Like, again, you can kind of imagine Sands when they're talking about it with the whole sort of Faultline thing. Great use of space and tension as well, some pregnant pauses there. We allowed the listener to kind of be in this moment of like, oh, what is going to happen next? And boom, you get slammed with it. Maybe some sub drops in there as well. Not quite sure. But just ultimately, yeah, nice and colorful there. Definitely no filler. Great use of real estate. It's tight instrumental performance there. Thematically, again, I think it was interesting to have the minor leading. That makes a lot of sense to me, but you have that parallel major and the Phrygian, and that Phrygian just adds a bit of darkness to it with the flat second chord there. And boom, boom. And it's just such a nice way to resolve back to the root note of the minor. And it's unexpected because up until this point, we've met either basically the minor key, so it was cool to, yeah, so I've already said it was cool to play with different stuff. And just to, again, to play with expectations of how we entered it with the ba ba, that kind of high note going into the resolving to the main. Yeah, sick. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, typical kind of comments to that. Again, I feel like maybe the lead tone was just a bit too sort of fizzy for my tastes there. It didn't have as much substance as maybe some of the other ones had. Either way, I did like a lot of the ideas we were trying to do instrumentally, and I feel like most of them were captured quite well within the piece there. There was presence for the various guitar, bass, drum, and vocal parts, as well as some of the synth elements that we had in the lower, sort of like ambience, the sub-pros parts. Music surrounded you in the headphones. There was panning of some guitars earlier on the track on one side of the stereo field as well, so that was just interesting from an actual experiential perspective. Nice and loud, pumping with the kicks, but that's okay. We want it to be heavy. It's good. 3 for 3 as far as I'm concerned. Great use of a shorter form factor. Because we had Severance, track number 4. The longest one in the EP here at almost 6 minutes. We'll see what we do. Oh, 6/8 or 4/4 triplets? 6/8, I think. Great. Great work with the bass. I like how it's exploring the octaves and triads. Really pretty lead there. Ethereal texture. tremolo with blues. Can a guitar go that high? I might have just gone straight to the vocals.
No warning face, no easing out, no lingering, no backing down. I don't detach, I don't descend, I cut the line. This is the end. Only distance, no resistance. All signals gone to silence. Coexistence. Severance.
A little bit sharp in the high end there on the vocals. Yeah. So that was a pretty cool song. I did like Severance. I suppose Severance would maybe be discussing, maybe they're just sick of the things that are causing the earthquakes, and they just want to try and sort of cut the ties that sort of choke them or strike them down or make them feel condemned. And maybe they're working towards that absolution at the end that they so seek. Maybe that's how we'll conclude this EP. That's kind of what I would imagine it potentially to be. Again, there's more context to this track, and I probably need another time listening through it to really sort of like get the nuances within it, but it was an interesting story regardless. That's a long track. I feel like the vocals are pretty good and consistent as per previous comments for the most part. There was just a little bit of sharpness on those last kind of like head voices that we had there. I don't know if that was like an EQing thing we could have potentially like kind of lowering the 1 to 4 kilohertz on that a little bit, but still it was good. You know, I like that some parts are a bit more sort of like vulnerable and quieter, and you could still hear the vocals clear. And in other points we were belting over top of all the different guitar, bass and drum parts, whether they're cleans or the distorted guitars or the, you know, the full kit. But ultimately, for most part, I'm pretty happy with the vocals in this one as well. We're more to the minor orient this time as opposed to some of the interesting sort of like harmonic minors or melodic minors and sort of parallels we had in the previous track, but that's totally fine. Yeah, this was more of a sort of a ballad-esque kind of piece, I think. What I particularly liked in terms of like outside of the vocals is basically how we explored the structure of it. There was more room for the guitar solo to breathe in this one. I also did dig how more active the bass was. It was nice for the bass to explore the fretboard a little bit and to sort of examine some roots and fifths and stuff like that outside of being usually the root note in this piece. You can kind of hear it going between different chords, and it was kind of neat to sort of, especially it maybe just had more room because there weren't any sort of mid to lowers kind of competing with it as much. But just how you have the bass and these kind of wistful sort of like wonderful guitar leads come in slowly and kind of rise as you go through the intro is really cool. And then the guitar goes up an octave in its range and then sort of simmers over top of the 6/8 pulse of the various guitar, bass and rhythm guitar, bass and drum parts. It's just a really kind of like pretty song that I think, despite again still being in the minor key, lets you know or alludes to the fact that maybe we are trying to find a better horizon, or maybe we've found a better place to be. I think when we get into those verse parts there, and we've got the chugs in the lower end, and we've got some sort of sub leads kind of dun 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 kind of going between notes on the side, and the vocals are full bore and the bass and drums there, we're just kind of in a happy place at that point. It's familiar territory with this band. It's just nice to have a different time signature though, as opposed to strictly 4/4. Those typical snare, floor tom, dun 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 crescendos before the pause, and then the chorus parts, you know, there's a lot of the kind of staples that we are used to at this point from Members of the Crown, as well as music within the genre. So a kind of more sort of like conservative here without being sort of like milquetoast about it. There is some interesting sort of like bluesy and kind of gritty slight chromaticisms in the vocals in certain parts. That's around the 3-minute mark there. But I also like the guitar solo, how again we had our fast kind of sweet picking and shred stuff. We also had some bluesy kind of triplet parts there, which had a bit of kind of stank to it. It was nice to have a different way of expressing melodies from that instrument aside from what we've had before. Considering what we've gone through, I wouldn't be surprised if we were playing the blues. And we kind of continue with that relative intensity for the most part. We do have ranges of intensity between some of the more low-key sort of like vocal oriented parts there where the drum's going to take a break for a moment. But that big part near the end is meant to be the kind of penultimate before I suppose we find out if we're going to get resolution or not. Just that moment around like the 420 mark, for example, where things are relatively subdued and low key is just a nice palate cleanse before we go back into the heavy stuff. I like that we're sort of breaking things up even at this point where we kind of know we can already do that. We're not taking the listener's attention for granted. So ultimately, I just feel like it's another really sort of like tight performance, just thematically oriented towards the minor with some bluesy scale kind of shenanigans occasionally. Ultimately, yeah, just really makes sense considering the subject matter, lyrics, and again, the style of music we're doing. And we have various different chord progressions of bass lines as per the other tracks. We're not taking the listener's attention for granted, as I mentioned before. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, similar comments to that. It's nice to have the automation of the volume as things kind of come up at the start there, as well as things going down a natural bell curve near the end. And ultimately, you can hear the guitar, bass, drums, vocals, and everything else clearly within the mix without any issues. You know, it's all very good. It's just there was a bit of sharpness, as I mentioned, with like the vocal take in that last part. And it's just if I was to say anything at this point about any constructive critique, it's just, you know, assessing whether we're really happy with like our overall guitar tones, and just sort of like occasional notch EQing, but otherwise everything is very, very good. And I like that I can kind of follow along and figure stuff out and that it makes sense to me from a story like thematic perspective. We've got Absolution, track number 5 though, last track for today. Another build. No, it's solid. It's good. I'm going to say something here very quick, like, so I understand. I don't want to sort of seem like I'm trying to make something more important than the person doing the music. I kind of would like I was hoping this to be a bit more ballsy for the last track. But it's okay if we want to come down a little bit and have more of an intimate sort of feel to the verse. It's fine. It's just we started so strong. We had such a push to it. I've already shown that we can do the soft, quiet kind of stuff in previous tracks. It just sort of been nice to have had things continue to be a bit more intense and elevated, even if we wanted to have a softer part later on.
Every measured silence, every sharpened tone.
Great vocal harmonies there.
I carried it longer than you ever knew. Wore the way like it was proof. I stood there with a sentence, tried to take my name. Learned the shape of pressure, learned the sound of blame. Nothing you decided ever left me clean.
solo. Okay.
I don't erase the damage. I don't deny the cost. I just refuse to live defined by what I already lost. No anger in my leaving, no victory to claim. Just breathe, returning quietly when I stop answering your name. I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need your release. I don't wait for permission to decide what stays with me. I carry what I survived, and I set the rest aside. This ends with me. This is Absolution.
Seems like the vocals were taking up a lot of that. I was expecting the guitars to be wider on the side. Ah, I see what we're gonna do there. Okay. I see what we were doing there with the end part with that major turn. We could have potentially have fully committed to the harmonic, melodic minor major turn on the second time through of that. I think that would have been kind of cool, especially because I feel like we're celebrating a victory here. You wouldn't necessarily need to sort of move too far away from the darkness of the overall sort of theme of the track, especially to the industrial layers on the drums and stuff like that. It just would have been kind of nice to have maybe not just had the last note be major. But that's cool. That's all right. So that was Absolution, track number 5. I think I kind of guessed correctly in a sense, that once we kind of cut away from those who are judging us and sort of trying to bring us down effectively, we have realized that we don't actually need to listen to these people and that they're not worth our time. And we're just going to absolve ourselves of any of that kind of BS that we've been through and sort of find our own future. They talk about a line, if I'm not mistaken, that sort of paraphrases that because of the space of them not being there, the lie is clearly sort of BS. It's not true. Then, it's just nice to have that kind of finish to an EP. So I think that the vocals throughout this track are consistently sort of on point in terms of what other parts of this. We've got big finish with the belt there. Very comfortable head and chest voice. Nice use of vibratos and legatos, etc. Variation of intensity and emotion through the piece there, not giving listeners attention for granted. And it was nice to have those lower parts, or more sort of quiet parts, in the verse sections. Although, again, I mentioned wanting to maybe have things be a bit heavier for like a time, but that's okay as well. Like, this is Embers of the Crown's music. That's all good. That's all good. Structurally, this track at 5 minutes 18 is quite well fleshed out with a variety of different, again, guitar-based drum ideas. It was kind of cool to have the kind of synth sequencer guitar kind of bits near the end of the track there with the different drum sounds. I like that they were just presented in a different way. That was something that kind of came in earlier as well there. I think there might have been actual guitar playing, I'm not sure, but either way, it was just very sort of tight, rhythmical, and sort of it elevated the track and added a sense of further intensity through the speed of it. And then when we're kind of coming to that almost pseudo breakdown bit there with the double and triplet kicks and stuff like that, you've got the chugging over top, the neon picking neoclassical elements there, and you really do think you're going into something before again you come back down with the quieter vocals, drums and bass and stuff. And I do think we do use a different drum kit, if I'm not mistaken, as well for that part as well. It's just nice to have softer drum kits used that aren't like the big full sounding ones, just for textural diversity. I have to admit, there are some parts where the vocals sound very pretty over top. There's kind of a breathiness with some of the tails, such as at the 1 minute 55 mark there. I do appreciate how we're trying to communicate with the listener. There's some interesting tremolo work in this guitar solo section as well that I kind of dig. I think it's cool to mess around with the bars there. It's neat if you can do the kind of really fast playing or the slower kind of vibrato, kind of bluesy, kind of rocky kind of stuff. But it's also neat to just explore your instrument in full, especially if you've got those extra toys like a tremolo or whammy bar, and just see what's possible with those. And it made total sense to have a 30-second guitar solo piece this long there. It didn't overstay its welcome. It was nice maybe just to have the one guitar solo. You could have probably expected the guitar solo, predicted it would occur, because it's been a consistent thing throughout these tracks, and it's fine because I like their guitar solos. It's just, yeah, no, it's the structure makes sense. If you've listened through the previous 4 tracks, you'll know what's going on in this one. And there's that similar kind of accessibility to the chord progressions thematically within the hook sections there, with adjustments of the flow and feel of things as we go through the piece with the various different instrumental layers. There's varying rhythms and speeds to different things. There's no weird sort of quirky diatonics or chromatics or uncomfortable parts there. And we do also try and sort of allude to the major near the end. There's a nice sort of hint that things will improve. You know, could potentially be a bit more on the nose about it without it being a detriment. Studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering perspective, I think in general things are pretty well handled. I think just at the end there, the vocals with that belt, they seem like they're kind of swallowing up a bit of the stereo field or the overall intensity of the piece there. I feel like if the guitars were more sort of on the side for that part, it just would have sounded like a huge finish, you know. That's just a dual double tracking guitarist kind of thing. We double track some of the vocals, I could hear that they were a bit bigger in some parts. But yeah, the guitars, especially in this genre, they typically need to be wide, especially in those heavy sections. So it's just something I'm just pointing out for transparency purposes. Ultimately, in general, the mixing was pretty good with that. I was happy with the composition, dynamic range. You know, it's a very sort of safe composition in certain regards, but it's still well done, and it tells the story quite neatly. The minor leaning to the theme as well is on par for the rest of the EP as well, which is good. And that's, again, the clean or softer guitars and harder ones, the solos, etc. The solo guitars, they all have their own sort of distinct tones within the meter. They are given space within a composition. Vocals, bass, and drums have presence with different drum kits as well, which is kind of cool. It's just nice to play with different tones and textures. And yeah, we come to the end with that fade out, and that's the EP. I suppose we're going to talk about it more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this EP from an act named Embers of the Crown, titled Fractured. In this section, I'm going to be providing an overall sort of analysis from lyrics and vocals all the way through to production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this EP is about? I think ultimately this EP is about someone who has felt like they've gone through difficulties in life, they've been judged without merit, they've been abused and taken for granted, and things are pretty terrible for them. They've been condemned, they'll fly underneath as shaky, and they're struggling to sort of keep themselves afloat. Eventually they get to a point where they sort of sever things and sort of find that they don't need these people in life anymore, and they're trying to sort of assert themselves with the end of Absolution, basically saying, hey, we don't need to hold ourselves to your expectations, you know, we don't need to deal with this anymore. We're beyond it. You have no power here, effectively. It's all lies. It's all kind of really dumb. And so I think that that's a story that will resonate with people. There will be an audience for that kind of thing. I feel like, especially with what we've got on display in terms of the instrumental patterns, the vocal styles, etc. You know, a lot of it's done really well. The vocals are typically sort of like lady sung, female fronted, double tracked or sort of like solo parts there, with a mixture of sort of softer, more sultry parts, a bit of intimacy, some vulnerability occasionally. We also have some harder belts, and we're louder when we need to. Vibrato, legato, countless different tails and low melodies. A bit of vocal fry as well, some interesting belts, and we do have some harmonies as well that work with the triads and such. And I think it's very good, as well as some sort of explorations and maybe some bluesy chromatics. You know, ultimately, we're very comfortable in the head and chest voice. We express ourselves well for the most part, things make sense. And the story and vocals combine, and they work to sort of form basically what this track is outside of everything else, which is, you know, the structure of it, the instrumental components. Because ultimately these tracks are like 3.5 minutes all the way to 5, all the way to 6. And that's long. When you start getting past the 4-minute mark, you basically needed to have enough adjustment and variety within the structure of the composition itself to keep people, you know, keep listeners engaged. And I think typically we have that. You know, there's enough different guitar solo sections versus choruses, bridges, middle eights, etc., instrumental parts on their own, little intros and outros. There's a lot of different individual components to keep people sort of moving through it. The transitions are seamless. There's no issues in terms of following along. There doesn't appear to be any filler. They're very sort of like tightly packed pieces for the most part. I think with Judgement, there was quite a lot to absorb within the first 3 minutes. And again, like I liked the track itself. It was just quite, you feel like you've had a song by the 3-minute mark. I think it's worth continuing to listen through though. I like the various, from the guitar perspective, the varying different power chord elements, the sort of cleaner reverb, Strymer-esque kind of picked arpeggiated strummed parts there. Lead guitar solos, lots of interesting sort of patterns there with a mixture of bluesy, some minor, major pentatonic there. Would typically minor, to be fair, thematically. And there's a lot of different hammer-on pull-off bends, unisons, bluesy phrasings. There were some of the unison bends, sweeps, and shreddy patterns there, fast 30-second picked parts there. Lots of widdly kind of like arpeggiated stuff. Lots to appreciate. And artificial, natural harmonics, squealers, etc. Lots of different ideas, but we managed to sort of change our way we play the lead to suit the mood of the piece, and we minimize like an outro solos or in like Faultline to not make it too complicated, to not overwhelm the listener. But when we have the real estate within the longer tracks, we explore different ideas in a way that's quite palatable, even if we have 2 or more solos and know maybe we'll take one a bit more easily than the other. The bass parts are typically sort of supportive of lots of what's happening within the root notes, although I do have to concede that sometimes it does explore a little bit. I think in a Severance, if I'm not mistaken, there we're going to go within the triads, the fifths, and the octaves, and it's just kind of nice to have the bass be a little bit more sort of like curious, you know, to have that extra bit of sort of like kind of zazz or spice to it. The drums are huge. There's a variety of different quarters, 8 triplets and 16ths, as well as 30 seconds and 16th triplets. Like there's some really quick parts. And they're either allowing a ground beat or a groove for the vocals, guitars, and bass and everything to sort of stand on, or they're rolling alongside in rhythmic unison with it and being incredibly quick. Often the drums aren't there at all, simply to allow things to just kind of sit and sort of exist within the ether. There are different sounding drums as well, like there's some sort of more industrial electronic layers in certain parts there that just seem a little more sort of like chilled out or sort of like ghostly, in a similar way to sort of like Absolution with some of those kind of synthy kind of guitar intro and outro parts there. Ultimately just quite effective with the range there, and they know how to further segment and keep a track intriguing. There are also some like synth textures, if I'm not mistaken, some keys in certain parts, but they're more sort of air candy-ish Atmos parts there that fill the middle, sort of high range there in a way that's very sweet. But we've got the dominant layers carrying us through the 25 minutes worth of music we have here, with a variety of different rhythms, chord progressions, and bass lines per track, let alone within the EP, and then it's just tight instrumental performance throughout. There's no issues really with like the performances. Some occasional note choices like an unusual sort of 808 position, or like maybe an underutilized sort of parallel major or something from subjectively with the Absolution. Outside of that, it's very, very good. Thematically, these tracks were typically in the minor, although I think Faultline had like a kind of parallel major Phrygian feel to it, which was kind of exotic sounding. It was just nice to sort of switch things up a little bit. I kind of dig that. I think that with Absolution, we're just going through so much that even though it was sort of relatively more positive in terms of getting away from the kind of, the judgment of people and not having to sort of deal with it, that should be a good thing. I understand why we went for the minor, because it was still like a Pyrrhian victory to a certain extent. And so ultimately, yeah, you have key signatures and note choices there, typically within the diatonic otherwise or the minor, that are represented well by the instruments. The vocals coalesce neatly with the existing harmonies and progressions within the instrumental parts, and just things connect. No issues whatsoever, for the most part, with what's going on. The studio recording, mixing, and mastering, typically the vocals, guitar, bass, drums, keys, etc., different bits of air candy were well positioned within the stereo field, sides of the headphones, as well as the frequency spectrum, and it was nice to have the guitars on one side or the other, for example, asymmetrical. It just makes it sort of more exciting. Oh, what's happening over there? Or what's happening over there? There were some parts where like we could have potentially had wider guitars or sort of like more sort of force or sort of push to them, but that's totally okay. There were some parts where like things were EQ'd really well for the most part. There was a bit of shrillness or sharpness in some of the very few vocal takes would go up in our range, but that's okay. That's just a bit of notch EQing. Some of the guitar tones I wasn't necessarily super convinced by. They just sounded a little bit sort of like thin, or like I wasn't sure what was going on with those. But so it's just maybe, again, if that's the tone we want, it's totally fine. Just from a subjective perspective on my part, it sounded a bit too thin. I like some of the more lush sounding ones, but that's just a personal thing, I suppose, more of a general thought. There was compositional dynamic range, there was a bit of production dynamic range, automation of volumes coming in and out of certain tracks was consistent across a few of these, and that's totally fine. It makes it a bit more sort of exciting, a bit more quote unquote cinematic, I suppose. And yeah, nice and loud, bit of pumping, bus compression, limiting is handled. I've already spoken about any applicable constructive critique. There's nothing really outside of that. In terms of general thoughts from a listener's perspective, I just kind of liked going through the story here. I think that the music was exciting and cool. They clearly can play their instruments very well. I don't know what Embers of the Crown are going to do next, because it seems like they've gone through a journey where they have now gone through Absolution, and maybe they're just happy now. Maybe this will be the EP from them. Maybe they will go through more self-learning and sort of find other areas of themselves they want to break free from. I'm not sure, but regardless, I just wish everyone involved the best of luck in future, because thank you for watching my review of this EP from an act named from Embers of the Crown titled Fractured, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and our Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.